Hello there ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the World of Warcraft New Player's Guide. In this series we'll be covering some topics that aren't really that well explained by the game. This won't be a new player's guide in terms of the very basic aspects of the game, things like movement, questing, leveling up, things like that. They're all covered by World of Warcraft's tutorial system. Instead we'll cover some things that players are just kind of expected to know. If you have any suggestions for topics that you'd like a guide about, let me know in the comments or use the links in the description to contact me. In this video, we're going to discuss raiding, one of the largest parts of the game, both in scope, availability, and difficulty. Raiding is the goal of a large portion of World of Warcraft's players. Entering massive dungeons, slaying epic monsters, and looting really powerful items is an addictively fun part of the game, and no doubt you've heard about it. Getting involved is a worthy goal indeed, but how do you go about it? What steps should you take? What should you expect? Just what is raiding? Well, let's go over it together. Raiding is, at its core, the act of battling powerful, important enemies with a group of your friends. Anywhere between 10 and 30 players can participate in a raid together, and each one will take upon a specific role in battle to aid success. The spells and abilities that the enemies, called bosses, cast and how they cast their spells are called mechanics, and it is these mechanics that dictate how a fight against a boss plays out. Most boss fights will be anywhere between 6 to 10 minutes long, with a couple lasting longer depending on their mechanics, and every boss fight has a mechanic that prevents the fight lasting longer than a certain amount of time. Often, mechanics will see players doing unique things such as manning cannons, avoiding large boulders, absorbing or intercepting abilities, and moving in strange ways. Some boss fights even have you piloting vehicles. The group of players that enters and participates in raids is called the raid group, or the raid, and it requires a structure to it. This structure revolves around the three roles of the game: damage dealer, healer, and tank, and every raid team requires a mixture of these three roles to succeed. Most players in a raid team will be damage dealers, focusing on doing as much damage as they can as quickly as they can to kill enemies before they kill everyone else. A smaller amount of players will be the healers, who will, instead of dealing damage, heal other raiders when they are damaged. Finally, a couple of raiders will be tanks, who focus on beefing up their health and survivability in order to survive the attacks of the huge enemies and bosses they will be fighting. Without damage dealers, the mechanics that prevent a fight from lasting longer than a certain amount of time would kill the raid group. Without healers, there would be no way to heal up damage and the raid team would eventually be killed. And without tanks, the enemies would just run amok and kill the damage dealers and healers in a single hit, eventually killing the entire raid. Every member of a raid team is therefore important, and it is crucial that everyone puts in their best effort in order for a raid to succeed. When the boss dies, powerful loot becomes available and is divvied up between members of the raid team depending on a number of different factors. Each raid team has its own way of handling loot, from a council that decides who needs pieces of gear the most, to point systems that grant points for killing bosses that are spent on loot in bidding wars. Each way of doing things is different, and it is important to remember that each raid team will be different in all kinds of different ways. Raids have different difficulties, with the higher difficulties introducing higher health enemies that deal more damage and have more spells to use against the raid. The difficulties in question are, as of this recording, normal, heroic, and mythic, scaling in difficulty. Normal and heroic difficulties are both flexible, meaning that a raid team can bring anywhere between 10 and 30 people, and the enemies will change their health and damage depending on how many players there are. Mythic difficulty, however, does not do this, and requires no more and no less than 20 players. Raid zones are instanced, meaning that once you enter a raid with your raid team, you will be greeted with a loading screen, and then your team's own instance of the raid will be created. It is entirely yours. The enemies, bosses, events, and locations will be exactly the same as every other instance of the raid, but it will serve as your team's own environment for raiding without fear of intervention from any other player. Raids will generally last anywhere between 2 to 5 hours depending on the raid team and their schedule, and raid teams could raid anywhere between 1 to 7 nights a week, although that is a bit extreme. Most go for 2 or 3, but depending on how serious the team is, they may raid more or less than this. The weekly system is used because every single week, raids reset. Unlike other dungeons that reset either when you re-enter them using the dungeon finder, reset when you right-click on your portrait and hit the reset button, or reset on a daily basis, raids will reset and their enemies respawn every week. This will happen on Tuesdays for those playing on the US servers and Wednesday for those playing on EU servers. The calendar will automatically tell you when raid zones that you have participated in reset. You can, however, extend the lockout of your raid if you choose to do so, which allows you to re-enter a raid from the previous week so that the raiders can continue to fight enemies midway through a raid rather than start from the beginning every week. Additionally, raids are quite an exclusive thing. You can only loot stuff from one boss per week, and it is important to note that although you can enter different instances of a raid more than once a week, you will not be eligible for loot that drops from the bosses you kill. However, this doesn't apply in between the different difficulties and works on a boss per boss basis. The easiest way to remember this is that if you have killed a boss this week, you cannot get loot from that boss again on that difficulty. So, if I killed a boss called Evil Demon of Doom on normal difficulty with group 1, I could not receive loot from him this week on normal difficulty with group 2. If I then went into Heroic and killed him with a different group, I would receive loot, but then I would not be able to get loot from either normal or Heroic until the raids reset next week. Raiding is a tall order, regardless of difficulty or how frequently it's done. There are steps you have to take in order to be raid ready, so let's go over a few of them. This isn't an exhaustive list, it's just a few of the ones that I consider are most important. First of all, make sure you're using a computer that can actually handle raids. More often than not, raids will include visually intensive effects that you have to be aware of. Things like large patches of fire, arcane mines, waves of energy, multiple enemies on screen at once. And those, alongside the fact that you will have the models, movements, and spell effects of your other raid members on screen, can make raiding quite taxing on your computer. If you're using a very old computer that slows down a lot, you might want to consider getting your hands on a more powerful PC. With quick reactions being a necessity in raids, not being able to see or react to the boss mechanics because your computer is lagging behind is a terrible thing. Remember that if you're experiencing lag in raids, it can be a good idea to go into the graphics options and turn down the settings to reduce lag. A slightly worse looking game is worth it for the smooth gameplay, which will let you react to things quicker and not die. Secondly, make sure you know your class. This is a vitally important aspect of raiding, because if you don't have a grasp of how your class plays, what spells to use in what order, and when to use your big abilities, then you'll be thinking about those things while you're fighting bosses, rather than focusing on the boss mechanics themselves, which will demand attention from you. So make sure you do plenty of practice with your class, learn the rotation of your spells you need to cast, and make them muscle memory. You can find a link in the description to Icy Veins, which has written guides for every class and specialization in the game. Make sure you practice so that when you're fighting a boss, you're focusing on the boss and its mechanics rather than your own. Third, make sure you know what you're up against. Boss enemies are multi-phased with dozens of abilities sometimes, some of which are incredibly dangerous and can kill you in a single hit. It is important that you do research on the fights you'll be going through, and it is best to do this long before the raid begins, or you will struggle to keep the mechanics in mind while under the pressure of the fight. You can find a link in the description to Fat Boss TV, who create video guides about the various bosses currently available in raiding throughout their various difficulties. Fourth, make sure that you're ready for the difficulty. There are a lot of difficulties in raiding, not only because you'll be fighting difficult enemies, but you'll be working with other people. This is both good and bad. It's more than possible that the people you'll raid with will be great, but a raid team can just as easily be tense, argument-heavy, and have a generally toxic atmosphere. It's impossible to guess what it's going to be like until you experience a particular raid team. And remember that you'll be giving up time, energy, and dedication to raiding, and sometimes other people can ruin it. Most of the time this won't be an issue, but even if it's not, you will have to deal with people, most often through voice communication, so be prepared to speak with other players and communicate with them a lot. Remember that raiding is a social activity, and communication is required for success. Fifth and finally, find a group to get into raiding with. This is the most important part in my opinion. I've created an entire video about that topic because it's a large and complex subject. Finding a raiding guild is very important, and you can click the link on screen now or use the link in the description to view my guide for applying to a raiding guild. So let's go over a typical raid. Before we begin though, it's important to note that every raid group will do things differently, and all kinds of things from nationality, progress, goals, and the people within a raid will affect its atmosphere. Remember that raiding is not only about getting loot and killing bosses, it is about spending time with other players that you enjoy spending time with. Alright, so let's take a 3-hour raid as an example. Before the raid begins, about 10 or 15 minutes beforehand, the raid leader will send group invites out to everyone who is attending. They will likely use the in-game calendar to figure out who will be attending, or some kind of system that might rely around whispering them in particular, or using a website to figure out who is attending. Members of the raid will likely start streaming onto the voice communication software that they use, such as Skype, Ventrilo, or Mumble. The raid team will form over the course of about 10 or so minutes, and people will begin to move towards the instance entrance. Once 3 or more people are at the entrance, they will likely use the summon stone outside to begin summoning people far away, to help speed things up. The raid team will then slowly start moving into the instance, normally one at a time, streaming over the course of a few minutes, with earlier players waiting at the beginning for everyone else to arrive. Once everyone is actually inside the raid instance, buffs will likely be applied. The players will cast their buff abilities to increase the strength of their raid members. A feast of food will likely be placed down for players to eat from to gain even more buffs. Then, the raid will fight the trash, usually unnamed enemies that are not too difficult to kill but require some concentration and coordination from the raid in order to succeed. Usually the raid will use this time to chat with one another. Once the raid team reaches the first boss of the instance, they will stop and discuss the tactics they will use to defeat it. This talk can last anywhere between 1 minute to 10 minutes depending on whether or not you have experience with the boss. If the raid did not do so at the start of the instance, or if people died during the trash fights, then buffs will be applied as discussed earlier. The raid will get into position to begin the boss fight, and then they will attack. The boss fight will end in one of two ways. The raid will kill the boss, or the boss will kill the raid. When the boss wipes out the raid and kills everyone, this is known as a wipe. The players will release, spirit, or self-resurrect and regroup to try again, often discussing what went wrong and how to stop it from happening again. This process will repeat until either the raid gives up, either because of fatigue, because they've been going for so long, or because they've run out of time and they've decided that the raid is over, or until the raid defeats the boss. Once the boss dies, the raid will generally celebrate a little bit, and then loot will be handed out. Again, this will be done depending on the raid's specific loot system. Usually the raid will move on while the raid leader stays behind and divvies out the loot. In the meantime, the raid will be killing the trash enemies up to the next boss. Then, this process repeats. The raid team will discuss strategy, attempt a boss, and either succeed or wipe. Some bosses will require anywhere between 20 to 100 attempts to get their mechanics right, depending on their difficulty and the skill level of the raid team. Patience is definitely required, but the results are definitely worth it, and the satisfaction of killing a raid boss is great indeed, proportional to the number of attempts you have put in. It is important to note that the raid team will likely take short breaks at points during the raid. These will likely be played by ear, but can be anywhere from every hour to once a raid, depending on the needs of the raiders, their atmosphere, how seriously they're raiding, and how long the raid is. Remember to use the breaks to step away from your computer to rest for a few moments, as raids can be quite a stressful experience, and a 5-minute break from them can work wonders on your head. So that's raiding. It's a large and broad topic, but these are the very basics for the new player to understand before they jump in. While there are difficulties to raiding and it can be stressful, difficult, and time-consuming, it offers some of the greatest experiences World of Warcraft has to offer. From the most casual of friend groups to the biggest, most dedicated hardcore guilds striving for world-first kills of the most difficult bosses in the entire game. Either way, it's definitely worth investigating, and if you want to learn more about raiding, you can check out my raiding guide by clicking the video on screen now, or using the link in the description. Raiding requires lots of research, so you might as well start now! So that's it for this guide. I hope you enjoyed it and found it helpful. If you have any questions, thoughts, comments, or suggestions for future guides, you can contact me using the links in the description, or you can just leave a comment. As always, I offer my heartfelt thanks to those who contribute to the channel through the Patreon system, with special thanks going out today to Sly Knight. If you want to help contribute to the channel and earn some rewards, you can find links to do so in the description. Thank you very much for watching, and I wish you the best of luck in the World of Warcraft.
What the fuck was that?
Wow, Tazim is like NSAing
Taz.
us here.
Jesus.
Just check and make sure everyone has their eye level.
Oh, well, I don't.
Takeo, what the hell?
Holy shit!
But it's Blizzard's fault.
Takeo has that stupid freaking trinket, and I want to murder him. And I swear to God, just one thing out of his mouth and I'll demote him.
What the fuck? Yeah.
Takeo has been stupidly lucky with his drops.
Like, what the fuck is that? I'm just gonna demote him now. Do it!
The Siege of Orgrimmar LFR guides are very important to me, and they're at the core of my channel, and they mean a lot to me, but kind of sucks now that they feel a bit redundant. Not only because obviously the Siege of Orgrimmar doesn't exist anymore as LFR, well, not something you do regularly, and the LFR that you do actually do regularly is piss easy. So that's all good. Here is the Son of Beast, so we will pop our Bloodlust at this point, because I believe this is where the chain ends. So just out of range of that fear, which was nice. We will actually pop Tremor Tome to break that. Might have been a better idea to save it for the next one so I was ready. But we've also got Spirit Walker's Grace up right now, just in case we get knocked back, just like that. So that's all good.